we're going to grow our way out of the deficit.
We are going to grow the GDP faster than the debt grows.
When things are relatively good and the economy is growing, we should be having a lower deficit.
Those are just a few clips from recent news coverage of President Trump's big, beautiful bill. We'll talk briefly about the lunacy of trying to outgrow the deficit in this episode.
But primarily, we're going to be holding a meeting of the GrowthBusters Book Club and discussing our first book, The Serviceberry, Abundance and Reciprocity in the Natural World by Robin Wall Kimmerer.
When elected officials think they have to trash the planet to balance the budget, who you gonna call?
Calling. Call the GrowthBusters. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Thanks for calling GrowthBusters, the podcast that helps us fight the tyranny of growth.
There's no pot of gold at the end of the growth rainbow, and the common man and woman are being saddled with the costs of growth, while growth profiteers multiply their wealth and decimate the planet. We all need to do something about that. I'm Dave Gardner, director of the documentary GrowthBusters Hooked on Growth, and founder and senior counselor here at the Center for Recovery from Growth Addiction.
And I'm Stephanie Gardner, environmental law and policy expert and sustainable energy professional. Check out growthbusters.org and find GrowthBusters on YouTube, Facebook, groups.io, and Blue Sky.
Also, look for Growth Busting on Instagram.
So we're trying out a new idea in this episode, our new GrowthBusters Book Club. And our first read was Robin Wall Kimmerer's The Serviceberry. We'll discuss that in a minute, but first we want to have a brief discussion of relying on economic growth to balance a nation's budget.
Yeah, I wanted to do that since that's been in the news. Interestingly, though, in The Serviceberry, Robin Wall Kimmerer wrote, "An economy based on the impossibility of ever-expanding growth leads us into nightmare scenarios. I cringe when I hear economic reports celebrating the accelerating pace of economic growth as if that were a good thing. It might be good for the Darrens, for the short term, but it is a dead end for others. It is an engine of extinction." Well, I was really glad to read that because I thought maybe I was the only one who cringes when we get these reports celebrating accelerating economic growth. But I also want to mention, for anyone who hasn't read her book, The Serviceberry, the Darrens, when she says it might be good for the Darrens, she explains in the book that she's going to call certain people the Darrens after Darren Woods, the chair and CEO of ExxonMobil. And she refers to anyone, kind of in that kind of position, the growth profiteers that are decimating our planet. She just calls them the Darrens, which is kind of fun. So what did you think about that, Stephanie? Saying that she cringes at those celebrations. Do you share my offense at those reports?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is something that we talk about every episode. I'm mostly impressed that Robin Wall Kimmerer gets it, right? How rare is that for someone else other than those of us on the GrowthBusters podcast to get it?
Yeah, it's awesome. And just a couple episodes ago, I shared with you in episode 89 of the GrowthBusters podcast, which was Bezos, we're going to need another planet. This statement that Jeff Bezos made about tackling the record high and ever-expanding national debt.
You have to grow GDP at 3, 4, 5% a year, and let the national debt grow slower than that.
So anyway, this subject came up in mid-May when the U.S. House of Representatives passed Trump's big, beautiful bill that continues and expands tax cuts, primarily for the wealthy. The bill is projected by the Congressional Budget Office to cut an estimated $1 trillion from social programs like Medicaid and food stamps, but still add nearly $4 trillion to the deficit over the next 10 years. Cabinet members, elected officials, pundits, and other Trump defenders were forced to defend this bill on news broadcasts. Here's a montage I put together of what we heard.
This bill is going to create an economic boom, and that creates stronger economic growth, which creates more revenue because people have more income to be taxed.
Really, a huge part of the deficit going up or down is just a function of whether the economy is growing or not.
That's it. We are going to grow the GDP faster than the debt grows, and that will stabilize the debt.
They are pro-growth policies that create greater growth in the economy, better paying jobs, and when people are making money and taking realizations, they're paying taxes and tax revenues go up.
We're talking about GDP growth, 4.2 to 5.2%, and the creation of jobs, which obviously is going to help with GDP and, frankly, revenue to the government.
Just cut the taxes and deregulate, and a lot of good things are going to happen.
I wanted to highlight this for you today because it really is a flagrant example of elected officials' obsession with economic growth. It's so much easier to promise and pursue economic growth than it is to do the hard work of balancing a budget. And that applies whether it's city, county, state, or federal. The hard work is looking at the detail, doing the math, ferreting out real waste, and setting and following priorities. So much easier just to say economic growth is going to take care of it all. Well, why is that a problem? Well, you know the answer to that, Stephanie, I know. But for anyone who might be new to the podcast, it's a problem because the increased tax revenue never ends up covering the costs, because costs skyrocket too in a growing economy. Herman Daly wrote a lot about the role of economists in finding the optimal scale, of whether that's of a company, a factory, or even an economy. And up to a point, you benefit from increasing economies of scale, so growth seems good. But in all things, in nature, in all economies, eventually you reach a point where the costs of growth expand to where they chew up any increasing benefits or revenue. And the other reason that this is really important is that on one planet, you just can't grow an economy forever. There are limits to growth. And we reached those limits 50 years ago, according to analysis by the Global Footprint Network. And we're now transgressing 6 of 9 planetary boundaries. We're outside the safe space. We're beyond optimal scale. So just wanted to get that in while it's hot in the news, Stephanie.
Yeah, I know it's been very up in front. In the energy industry where I work, it's been a lot of bad news for renewable energy, unfortunately, as part of that bill. So I think there's going to be a lot of reverting back to fossil fuels and, other kind of less beneficial to the planet measures, unfortunately.
Yeah, I just can't believe that we're taking these backward steps when we really need to be making much bigger, bolder steps forward. So anyway, main thing we wanted to do in this episode is our book club. First selection, as you mentioned, was The Serviceberry, Abundance and Reciprocity in the Natural World by Robin Wall Kimmerer, who really made a big name for herself with her bestseller, Braiding Sweetgrass. This book is a pretty quick read. It's small, and as a result, it belongs in every guest bathroom around the world, don't you think?
Absolutely. Yep. It's about 100 pages, and it's a small book. It almost looks like a children's book. It's actually really beautiful, and there's some very beautiful illustrations throughout. So it's really accessible. Highly recommend reading it if you hadn't had a chance yet.
And I want to just start our conversation with one quote that I think is pretty killer. When an economic system actively destroys what we love, isn't it time for a different system?
Yeah, and as part of our book club idea, we had hoped that folks would read along with us and provide their thoughts and feedback so that we could share that with everyone on this recording of our podcast. So we encouraged folks to send in emails, give us a phone call, send us an audio note. And so, Dad, how did we end up? How many people decided to read along with us?
I am so excited to report that the response was underwhelming.
Oh, no.
Almost no one. That's really, really disappointing. So we're going to have a conversation about whether the book club was such a good idea or not, or whether one time out is not a good sampling for us to base that decision on. But I don't have any comments from anyone after reading the book. But I do have one email that I want to share. Stephanie, you want to share that?
Yeah, so it looks like we got one email from Jeremy Bell, and he wrote, I just got round to listening to your recent podcast episode with Matt Orsog, a really interesting episode. I learned a lot about ecological economics. And for those of you who maybe didn't listen to that episode, it's episode 90 called Degrowth by Design or Disaster. So go listen to that one if you haven't yet. Jeremy continues, I also heard you mention the start of your book club, which I think is a great idea. I haven't read The Serviceberry by Robin Wall Kimmerer, but I was recently given a copy of her earlier book, Braiding Sweetgrass. I run a crops garden in Indiana where we grow vegetables and supply them to the local food pantries. One of the gardeners asked me if we could try growing the Three Sisters as outlined in Braiding Sweetgrass. As you may know, this is an indigenous method of agriculture involving corn, beans, and squash. The idea being that the corn grows straight up, providing a stem for the beans to grow up, and the squash leaves retain moisture at the base. The author explains how this confused the colonists in Massachusetts, who thought that crops had to be grown in straight rows of single species, and yet it was very successful. Anyway, we're giving it a go in a corner of the garden this summer. We'll see if it is a success. Regards, and keep up the good work.
Yeah, I thought you might think that was pretty cool, Stephanie.
Yeah, it's awesome to see it in action, right? You know, Robin Wall Kimmerer at least inspired one person to try this indigenous method of agriculture. So that's great.
Yeah, so thank you, Jeremy Bell, for doing this. And thanks for writing, because not a lot of people did that. Now, in the absence of other input from listeners, I do want to share something written about the book by Sally Gillespie in her Substack column, Psyche's Nest. And I'll put a link in the show notes if you want to read this or familiarize yourself with her column. Our living world's circular economy has sustained and furthered life for 4 billion years, while capitalist economics have wreaked global havoc in a bare few centuries. What heartens Kimmerer and me is recognizing the creative possibilities that can emerge when dysfunctional systems are disturbed or even collapse. For it is in times of major breakdown or loss that cycles of regeneration kick in most powerful. Old growth succumbs to new growth. What is disastrous in the short term, like a pioneer species colonizing a devastated forest, can set the scene for the emergence of a more robust ecosystem ahead. She shares this quote from the book. Succession relies in part on incremental change, the slow, steady replacement of that which does not serve ecological flourishing with new communities. But it also relies on disturbance, on disruption of the status quo, in order to let new species emerge and flower. Some massive disturbances are destructive, and recovery from them may not be possible. Other disturbances, of the right scale and type, create renewal and diversity. And then she offers this comment. Our collective work now is to soften the disturbances on our doorsteps so that we can become allies in nurturing life's restoration through incremental change, adaptation, and succession. As disruptions and destructions reach our communities in all manner of ways, acts of kindness and generosity are already challenging modernity's stories of never enough and you're on your own. Often led by those on the margins, we are remembering how to pool resources and gather for action and care as we tend to losses, connections, breakthroughs, emergencies, and emergence. It seems to me that no one word is sufficient to describe this devolving and evolving process we are now in. What we need more than a word or a phrase are stories bearing ancient roots and seeds of possibility for the future. So, thanks for joining our book club without even knowing it, Sally Gillespie.
So what was your take on the book? What did you learn? What was your gut feel and takeaways, the main themes that you called out or noticed when you were reading this book, Dad?
It struck me that almost every page, at least every other page, I found myself wanting to jot down a quick quote from the book. She offered lots of tidbits where she just articulated something that I thought would really resonate with people. So I have collected those, and I hope to somehow find the time, shift priorities or something, and maybe create some memes using some of her quotes, as well as a bunch of other quotes that I've been collecting for several years. I think that's what I'll do when when I break a leg or something like that and I'm no longer mobile, or if I lose my microphone. Other than that, I wanted to mention, I think that the book is, it's not a typical nonfiction kind of work that we would typically talk about here. It is sort of a worldview primer, wouldn't you say? Its goal isn't to give you a bunch of facts to walk away from or case studies, although she uses nature as a case study for sure, but it's just to inspire you to think differently about our economy and change your worldview.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also, to me, it seems like it's a form of indigenous storytelling. Robin Wall Kimmerer is a member of the Potawatomi Nation, which she describes this as one of the Anishinaabe peoples of the Great Lakes region. So she obviously has been part of this culture in this community where she's learned different things, and she's sort of passing on that wisdom to us through storytelling. So I feel like it's almost like an ancient form of just sharing knowledge and wisdom and how to act in the world. I don't really want to compare it to the Bible, but it almost kind of feels in that vein of, you know, stories that help tell, you know, what the moral ethos of the culture that you're in should be, and what can we learn from the past in these fables too. You know, she kind of even interweaves this concept at one point of, what's it called? There's like a monster character, the Wendigo. I think it's called the Wendigo. It's this kind of creature that just devours everything. And it's almost like a fairy tale, or a, you know, a Christian equivalent might be, you know, the devil. It's sort of sharing stories and sharing wisdom through those parables, if you will. That was sort of my interpretation, but they're more modern day stories. It's like she's talking about her neighbors more than she's talking about these sort of fairy tale characters.
I may be missing the mark here, but I'm thinking this might be a little bit like Walden by Henry David Thoreau. It's kind of like spend the summer with Robin Wall Kimmerer, and she shares her days and what she thinks about. And the thoughts that are inspired as she spends her days in nature. So that's pretty interesting. And I should mention that this book was based on an essay that was published in Emergence magazine back in 2022. And I'll put a link in the show notes to that essay. So if you're not going to get the book and put it in your bathroom, you can at least go read the essay and you'll get a good sampling of what's in the book. She expanded on that in this book.
Yep.
So she kind of wanted to know if natural systems could be understood as analogs to economic systems. And one of the first things that struck me was this idea from indigenous cultures that what we get from nature are gifts. They're gifts from nature, and we need to respect all of the natural sources of our gifts. And if we abuse them, they go away. And indigenous cultures understood that. They took care of the ecosystem in which they lived and hunted and gathered so that their needs would continue to be met by that ecosystem.
Yeah. A main theme that I felt throughout, and it's even in the subtitle of the book, was around abundance, right? This idea of if you recognize what you do have as enough and you express gratitude for it, then you are living in this feeling and economy of abundance where there's enough and you're sharing, you're not hoarding, you're not accumulating. And so this abundance mindset and culture and economy, she compares it with how our market-based economies are really founded on scarcity and the concept of supply and demand having to be unequal so that prices are higher and there's competition that kind of orchestrates everything. And so there's this real juxtaposition between the ideas of abundance and scarcity throughout her discussions around these different economic models.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up because abundance, it's something that's always bugged me, that people who are really deep in thought about what's not working in our system and how to maybe make changes in our system to behave more sustainably, it's always puzzled me that they want us to stop talking about scarcity and start talking about abundance, because it seems to me that we need to know that some resources are scarce, like oil, phosphorus, fresh water, and that the scarcity of those resources ought to motivate us to be better stewards of them and to not waste them and to conserve. So to me, for the longest time, This idea of scarcity seemed to me something that we need to be very familiar with. So I don't think Robin is saying, in fact, I think she, at some point in the book, she actually writes about that. Yeah, she writes, eventually, made me feel a little better when she wrote, "It is manufactured scarcity that I cannot accept. The scarcer a commodity, the higher its cost and the greater the revenue." And then she goes on, "The threat of real scarcity on the horizon is brought to us by unbridled capitalism. Extraction and consumption outstrip the capacity of the earth to replenish what we have taken." So she's not saying strike scarcity from your vocabulary, but she is saying we need a system that doesn't try to profit from scarcity, and we need a culture where we're satisfied with enough. And if we do that, if we treat the world, like a gift from nature, then there will be abundance.
Yes. Yes, I do think that she does ignore what you're just talking about, right? Like at one point she even talks about how there's enough food on the planet to feed everyone, but it's not distributed equally. And only if we shared all that food, then everyone would have enough. That only takes you so far, right? When you're using more Earths than you have in terms of resources and how quickly they can replenish. So yes, could there be more sharing? Absolutely. But doesn't mean that we haven't run up against the scarcity of those resources because of the way that we're using resources and the number of people on the planet. So she kind of glides over that a bit.
Yeah, I can't believe she's done the math, because I don't think there is a way to feed 8 billion people nutritiously on the planet over the long term.
Right.
The way we have enough today is a very unsustainable method of producing food, and it's disrupting the climate big time. Got to mention that. So we cultivate abundance by living within the means of the planet, by not overconsuming, not hoarding, not competing, and not overpopulating, by the way. If there were 2 billion of us or less, it wouldn't be so critical how we behave. It wouldn't be quite so critical how we grow our food. I think it would be smart for us over the long haul to still do all the right things, but there'd be a little bit more room for mistakes. And in fact, we lived on the planet for a long time with smaller numbers than 2 billion, and I'm sure we made a lot of mistakes, but we survived because we hadn't taken over the whole planet.
Yeah, and I definitely want to read the guidelines for the honorable harvest, because I think that they're the pieces of wisdom that are intended to help us understand how to use resources, right? And how to not use too much. So let me find that in the book real quick, because I think they're lessons that we all could learn. Know the ways of the ones who take care of you so that you can take care of them. Introduce yourself. Be accountable as the one who comes asking for a life. Ask permission before taking. Abide by the answer. Never take the first one. Never take the last. Take only what you need. Take only that which is given. Never take more than half. Leave some for others. Harvest in a way that minimizes harm. Use it respectfully. Never waste what you have taken. Share. Give thanks for what you have been given. Give a gift in reciprocity for what you have taken. Sustain the ones who sustain you, and the earth will last forever.
I'm so glad you shared that. That's great. One of the best bits of the book that I jotted down was this. Let's remember that the system is led by individuals, by a relatively small number of people who have names, with more money than God, and certainly less compassion. They sit in boardrooms deciding to exploit fossil fuels for short-term gain while the world burns. They know the science, they know the consequences, but they proceed with ecocidal business as usual. I don't know if I need to say any more. It seems to me like enough said there.
I think if you haven't read the book, you're starting to get a sense of how much is packed into each of her sentences. So it does make for really deep reading, heavy reading. And I'm really excited to see some of the memes, Dad, that you potentially want to put together of her quotes.
Yeah, and let me share one more here. I lament my own immersion in an economy that grinds what is beautiful and unique into dollars converts gifts to commodities in a currency that enables us to purchase things we don't really need while destroying what we do. The Serviceberries show us another model, one based upon reciprocity rather than accumulation, where wealth and security come from the quality of our relationships, not from the illusion of self-sufficiency. There's a sentence there with Serviceberries in there, and so I think maybe, Stephanie, I want to see if you want to explain why the book is called The Serviceberry. What the heck is a Serviceberry? I never heard of a Serviceberry. Had you?
I had not. It's basically a flowering and berry-producing tree. I don't think it had to be the Serviceberry. I think it could have been pretty much any plant.
Yeah.
Because she kind of goes into all of the gifts that are exchanged between all kinds of different plants and animals so that everyone has what they need, right? And I think, a berry is a good example because us humans love berries. And so she actually gets to pick these berries and eat them, and they're apparently delicious. It would be great to try one someday if we can ever find one. But yeah, she kind of talks about all the insects that had to pollinate the flowers of the tree and how those insects got nectar to help them have the energy to go about their lives, and the air and the water and just how everything's very interconnected in nature. And it's not a monetary or commodity based system. It's really a gift economy. So it's a good analogy, I suppose, for how we could act when it comes to each other and the things that we need to survive.
Thanks for that. And, one of the themes is longer-term thinking, real short-term thinking. You might not worry too much about the interrelated services of this area where she spent her time writing this essay and then this book. But over the long term, you really do. You don't want to abuse any parts of that system or the system will break down. And it kind of made me think a little bit about episode 54 of the GrowthBusters podcast, The Good Ancestor, Following the Intergenerational Golden Rule. In that episode, we interviewed philosopher Robin Wall, who wrote a book called The Good Ancestor, A Radical Prescription for Long-Term Thinking. So I'll put a link in the show notes, and that would definitely be worth revisiting. And while I'm talking about links, I'm also going to put a link in the show notes to a review of The Good Ancestor, a great review published in Grist in 2021. A resolution for 2021, be a better ancestor. And when I was digging back in there to kind of look for some links to share, Stephanie, I ran across a great video that was just published 6 months ago by the Long Now Foundation. Robin Wall is a research fellow at the Long Now. And this video, I haven't had a chance to watch it yet, but I'm going to, and I'm sure you'll want to as well. We'll put a link in the show notes. It's called What Doughnut Economics Can Learn from History. And it is Roman and his wife, Kate Raworth, who is the author of Doughnut Economics and the world-renowned guru of Doughnut Economics. And I remember it wasn't until I was deep in conversation with Roman that I found out that he and Kate were husband and wife. I interviewed Kate on the Conversation Earth podcast. I'll put a link in the show notes to that as well.
I think I really need to listen to that because I don't think I've ever gotten a good overview of doughnut economics. I've heard the term.
I think Kate got better at explaining it as time went on. And I think if you go find the Doughnut Economics website, I forget what it's called, but we'll put a link in the show notes. She's been publishing videos regularly that do a better job, I think, of explaining that. I would put it in the category of the planetary boundaries. It's just really a good overall model for how to define the space that we want our economy to exist in. We don't want it to be in the hole of the donut where people's needs aren't being met, but we don't want to extend beyond the outside diameter of the donut because then we're transgressing planetary boundaries.
Okay.
But it was a good book to read or listen to that interview or both.
Yeah, thanks for pointing us to that. I'll have to check that out.
Okay, so there were a few things that I put in this category that I called solutions. And some of those are at the beginning of the book where she's really talking a lot about the gift economy. So I've kind of reordered this. But early in the book, she does write that recognizing enoughness is a radical act in an economy that is always urging us to consume more. You'll find that meme. I'll definitely put that out somehow. And then, this is an interesting quote. It is heartening to see all these grassroots innovations are arising. What we love, give economies, most in small societies of close relations. Community well-being is the unit of success. I think that's an exact quote. She does kind of a good job of explaining, what a gift economy is. And I will read this quote. Libraries, parks, trails, and cultural landscapes we regard as public goods. They are what we call common resources, meant to be shared and cared for by the people who use them. They become possible when we pool our excess dollars in the form of taxes for the common good. We grumble about paying taxes, but in essence, this legal obligation is an investment in collective care, in the commons. Other nations provide more than books and green spaces for the common good. These social democracies provide free universal health care, for example, education for all, elder care, family support, and investment in sustainability. And I think she goes on, to write that she's not sure that's maybe beyond a gift economy. But I think in a big, hard and fast, long-term capitalist economy, this is something that people, I think, can kind of grab onto and say, oh, okay. Because I think it'll be challenging for people who are busy in the middle of New York City counting dollars and cents to gravitate to Mother Nature as an analog for a sustainable economy.
I agree, because I do think that ultimately what she's asking us to do is to change our mindset.
Yeah.
Instead of thinking of, I suppose, the t-shirt that you buy at the clothing store or the berries that you buy in a plastic container at the grocery store as a commodity, you think of them as a gift from the earth, right? Now, that's pretty challenging it's easy, but it's also challenging, if you think about it, to change how you view something. On the one hand, it doesn't require anything other than your brain to change your viewpoint. On the other hand, we've all been so indoctrinated to think of these things as commodities, right? But she helps us understand how changing your mindset around how you view that object has an impact. So, for example, she says at one point, mistreating a gift has emotional and ethical gravity as well as ecological resonance. When something moves from the status of a gift to the status of commodity, we can become detached from mutual responsibility. We know the consequences of that detachment. Why have we permitted the dominance of an economic system that literally commoditizes everything, and just assigns dollars and cents, and therefore that detachment to all of these goods and services that we're trading about.
Yeah, and that detachment really, a lot of that comes from globalization. And I'm pretty sure she never uses the word globalization in the book, but it made me think about globalization when she wrote, "You might rightly observe that we no longer live in small, close-knit societies where generosity and mutual esteem structure our relations. But we could. It is within our power to create such webs of interdependence quite outside the market economy. Maybe that is how we extract ourselves from a cannibal economy. Intentional communities of mutual self-reliance and reciprocity are the wave of the future, and their currency is sharing." And I think that's real important because globalization is killing the planet. Our impacts are out of sight and out of mind, and monetizing everything really keeps us from valuing and cultivating things that are important that don't cost money. And that reminded me of Jerry Mander, who founded the International Forum on Globalization, and he wrote The Case Against the Global Economy and for a Turn Toward the Local. And he also wrote The Capitalism Papers, Fatal Flaws of an Obsolete System. And in fact, I think I'm mentioned in that book. I can't remember how and where and why. But another link in the show notes, Conversation Earth Podcast, episode 203, I interviewed Jerry. The title of that podcast episode was End of Ponzi Economy. And so that might be worth looking back at. Gerrymander no longer walks this earth, so you can't give him a call. But Stephanie, it reminded me when Robin Wall Kimmerer wrote about this possibility of these closer, smaller relationships being the wave of the future, it reminded me of the Bright Future project that I conceived as part of the platform for my presidential campaign. I'll put a link in the show notes to the Bright Future project page. The main points of that future were that we all work less, half time if possible, so our footprint shrinks. But to ensure everyone's needs are still met, we set up community hubs across the nation where locals get together and figure out how to support one another. And some of the things that they would be doing would be tool libraries, repair cafes, farming each other's yards, reskilling, barter, and it would all be part of relocalizing. And she's definitely talking about relocalizing, and that is where we're going. We're going to get there, by design or disaster, probably.
I 100% agree.
Richard Heinberg writes a lot about that.
Yeah.
I was looking for something to refer people to where they could kind of read up on that. And the best thing I found was a chapter in Bob Banner's book, Sustainability, Radical Solutions Inspiring Hope. And that book is really a collection of essays, a lot of which were published in an online magazine that he published for a few years, Hope Dance. I wanted to give people a link so that they could read this chapter that he wrote, Why Relocalization? A Return to the Local, because it explains the advantages of localization really well. And man, that is not out there. HopeDance.org, no longer a website. So I've reached out to Bob. I haven't heard back from him, but I'm going to see if there is a place where that resides or if he'll give me permission to just repost that somewhere and send people to.
Yeah, these all sound like really great resources.
What else did you want to share?
Well, I think I just wanted to give a recent anecdote of something that was gifted to me. I had this plan for a graduation gift for my brother who was graduating from college. And I wanted to have a monogrammed patch sewn onto this bag. And so I was needing a tailor and just went onto Google and found someone with good reviews and showed up and asked her if she could do this. And she was like, yeah, I can do this. And then before I left her with the bag, she said, oh, and I'm not going to charge you anything. This is on me. And I was like, no, I want to pay you. And she just insisted. She said, anyway, it would have been not very much money anyway. And sometimes I just want to do it for free. And I don't know if it was because I had told her it was a graduation gift. I had thrifted the bag and she said she liked that I had thrifted it. But anyway, I just left feeling kind of weird, honestly. I was thinking to myself, I really want to compensate this woman for her time and energy doing this. And I was like, well, maybe she doesn't want money. Maybe I could buy her a gift card, at a craft store or sewing supply store, because I know she'll be buying sewing supplies, and maybe I could give her this gift card. And I didn't have time. I just was very busy that week. But so when I went back and picked up the bag, she had done a great job. It looked beautiful. And I brought some cash with me and I tried to pay her. I said, I really want to pay you. Would you even accept a tip? And she refused. She just would not let me pay her at all. And it was just the weirdest, like such a rare experience that never happens at all. And I just didn't even know how to handle it.
It's wild.
But yeah, but it was so kind, like my experience ultimately was, wow, there's a really kind human out there, and that's awesome. And I love knowing that. And I think I also did feel like I should pass it on, and I don't know exactly how that'll manifest at some point, but I feel inspired to pass that on.
I figured that you probably would. Yeah, that is pretty cool. And that's it. That's the magic that Robin Wall Kimmerer has done a pretty good job of capturing in that book, I think.
Yeah.
I want to finish our conversation about the book with this line from page 96. A fellow tribal member captured my thoughts when she wrote, "If the economy requires people to consume more resources than the earth can replenish just to keep the whole thing from collapsing, isn't it time for a new economy?"
Well said.
It cheapens it to say, well, duh.
Also, you did already read that quote earlier in the podcast, so you're going to have to edit one of those out.
But I think it was a slightly different one.
Worth repeating.
I don't know. What do you think? Is the book club a bust?
I think it's a bust. At the very least, maybe people are getting some value out of us reading the book and sharing what we've learned and some quotes. But I don't know that we're going to get participation, which would have been really, really nice.
Yeah. So I just think when we find an important book, we can talk about it, or we can invite the author to join us, and maybe we can warn people we're about to do that and get some input. But I don't think the book club as envisioned is working out that well. What I will promise is maybe a list of the books that are sitting on my nightstand, and yours, Stephanie, maybe?
You've given me a lot of those books over the years.
So we're recording this episode on Memorial Day weekend in the United States, a weekend when we're expecting record travel. So I just want to really briefly talk about that and share with you a bit of a CBS News report about Memorial Day weekend of 2025.
AAA expects a new record, yes, another one. More than 45 million Americans traveling more than 50 miles this holiday weekend. The vast majority are expected to be on the roads.
By road, train, and plane, Americans are moving towards their summer vacations.
So we are going to have, I think, historic flights, the biggest summer that we've had in American history.
Yeah, so a 2% increase in air passengers expected by TSA, 18 million. Over 40 million people traveling, and I just want to mention that means a record carbon footprint. But carbon dioxide emissions aren't on the minds of most of the people doing that traveling this weekend. Why would they be? No mention in any of these news reports of record carbon emissions this holiday weekend. Can't we get the full story?
That would be nice. All right, so just want to put a plug in for listener feedback. We love hearing from you. We often try to share the most interesting feedback on our episodes. So write us, let us know what's on your mind, what you think about the information we're sharing on the podcast. You can email us, podcast@growthbusters.org. You can also write a comment on this episode's page on growthbusters.org. Each episode has its own page on the website. You can also leave us a voice message at 719-402-1400.
If we're going to spread literacy about ecological overshoot and limits to growth, we could really use your help. Please share this episode with people you love or anyone who needs to learn about limits to growth. It could be your kids, your parents, any billionaires you know, classmates at your high school or college reunion this summer. What a great conversation starter.
Absolutely. And don't forget to follow the podcast in your podcast app so that you'll be notified of all of our new episodes.
And consider joining the GrowthBusters online community at groups.io.
Big thanks to Jake Fader and Carlos Jones for writing, producing, and singing the GrowthBusters theme you're about to hear at the close of this podcast.
Learn more, donate, and sign up for email updates at growthbusters.org. Thanks so much for being a GrowthBuster. After all, we've got a planet to save.
Some may dream to pave mountains and streams, but not me. I'm a growth buster. Some may just want more, but don't know what it's for, but not me. I'm a growth buster. Don't want a solution at the cost of pollution. They think bigger is better at the cost of the weather. But no, not us. We are the growth busters. Calling, 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 calling. Call the growth busters.